As said, my name is Leah Lawrence, and I'm the former president and CEO of Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I served there from 2015 to 2023. Over the last year, I spent a lot of time responding to various inquiries as a result of the actions of a whistleblower.
Obviously, the two of you, Ms. Verschaeren and Ms. Lawrence, I think you really need a refresher on what conflict of interest really means. And quite frankly, Mr. Vandenberg, being a member of the Ontario Bar, certainly has responsibilities as a lawyer to understand what a conflict of interest is. Not actually an actual conflict, which this clearly is, but a perceived conflict. And in fact, he was paid for this report as well. So, to both you, Ms. Lawrence and Ms. Verschaeren, how much was Mr. Vandenberg paid?
So, if I could correct some assumptions there, Mr. Brock.
How much was he paid?
First of all, the Osler
Ma'am, how much was he paid?
If you would let me finish, please.
No, I'm asking the question, ma'am.
Mr. Brock, Mr. Brock asked a question, Ms. Lawrence. If
how
you
much
could
was
answer
he
his
paid?
question and then take some time afterwards.
I don't have that information. I think
will you table the information as to how much he was paid?
We can do that, of course. Now, if I could correct some things that Mr. Brock said, Mr. Vandenberg had absolutely nothing to do with the Osler report. As per professional practices in legal situations like these, an independent counsel from Toronto was appointed, and they had no communications as per best practices of the profession. So the assertion that Mr.
So Ms. Lawrence, this is my time. Ms. Lawrence, this is my time. Ms. Lawrence, this is my time.
And
he is a partner at that law firm. There is a conflict of interest procedure and policy in every single law firm.
Yes, and
he should have declined that because they're not the only national firm in Canada. All right, they may have a good reputation, but they're not the only firm. So I want to know how much Osler was paid for this report. I want to know specifically what time Mr. Vandenberg put into the report. And I also want to bring to your attention Section 16 of the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act, which prohibits members from receiving remuneration for that type of service.
Mr. Vandenberg.
So thank you for that. I'm asking questions. I'm not asking for any editorial, ma'am. I am not. This is my time.
Provide the information.
Ma'am, this is my time.
As we already
I have the floor, ma'am. Ms. Lawrence, I have the floor.
Mr. Brock.
I asked Lawrence, will you table all the emails regarding your concerns about the appointment of Ms. Verschaeren as the chair of the board between yourself and the ministry officials, chief of staff, PMO, and PCO, because we have evidence that you felt there was definitely a conflict of interest on her appointment. Will you table all of those emails between yourself and the government?
I did advise the chair to contact the ethics commissioner. She did that, and of course we can make available information.
Thank you very much.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence, for being here. I appreciate it, and we all appreciate you coming. We know it's probably been a very challenging time for you, and appreciate your willingness to come here and speak of it. You mentioned in your opening statement about the period of time where there was a change in the chair. So maybe if I could start there. You were originally hired by the newly appointed at the time Chair Jim Balsillie to clean up some of the governance practices and management practices at the place. And in 2017 or so, these internal reports were done by Treasury Board and the Auditor General. I think you said that gave SDTC a clean bill of health on all these things that you had fixed. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Auditor General's report was in 2017, and I believe just after that, the Treasury Board Secretariat report was completed.
So it would seem to me that with all of that going on, it would seem like shortly thereafter it would be an odd time to change the chair unless the chair requested that. Did in the time where that was going on, and Mr. Basillie's not a shy guy, he speaks publicly on a lot of issues and has for a long time as one of the co-founders of one of Canada's most iconic companies. did the minister's office or anyone at the political level ever contact you and express concern about what he was saying publicly while chair of SDTC?
In particular, in the time period probably in 2018 and into early 2019, there would be several moments when it was raised with me or with my team that there was concerns about public statements that Mr. Balsillie was making as an individual. At the time, there was a consultation underway on data and digital legislation, and of course, this is an area he's expert in, and he would make critiques of that legislation and provide input in his role as an individual. But often those statements, and in the aftermath of those statements, we would get calls asking about why he was making statements.
Who would you get those calls from?
In general, one occurrence happened with the Associate Deputy Minister when I was in a meeting on another thing. I was asked, should he continue as chair, and was this a thing to continue? And the second instances would be really at the working level when mid-level people would call our team of government relations. Did
that ever get communicated to you as a reason why there would be a change in the chair?
It was clear that there was evident discomfort and that they were actively looking for another chair. It's my understanding, although I was not privy to the conversations with Mr. Balsillie in the minister's office, that he wanted to continue and he communicated that to them. But around May 2019, June 2019, I was informed that there were two candidates that they'd like me to talk to as potential candidates for the board chair, and one of them was Ms. Verschuren.
Who informed you of that?
Minister Baines actually asked me to speak to those two potential candidates, and I did. And when I spoke to Ms. Verschuren, I asked her to speak to the Ethics Commissioner. This was well in advance of her appointment, indicating that I thought it was important that she talk to them about her direct conflicts. At the time, SDTC had a contract with her company, and this was well known. It was public information. It's posted both on SDTC's website and, of course, on Ms. Verschuren's company's website.
So, and according to your opening statement, after you, I'm assuming after, based on what you just said, after Minister Baines suggested she would be a good replacement, how many days did it take between when that happened, you did the review, and Mr. Balsillie was switched to Ms. Verschuren?
Yeah, it was about probably 2, maybe 3 weeks later when I got a call from ADM Noseworthy telling me that Ms. Verschuren would be the new chair. When I raised the concerns again, and he told me that without a policy it would continue, it happened. And so I think it was June 19th that she was appointed. And I actually was the one who called Mr. Balsillie to tell him that he was no longer chair, and she was chairing a meeting 3 days later.
So this is where this idea of managed conflict comes from, that somehow you could manage the conflict that the government was aware of when they appointed her?
Well, I have to say that the management team has to put in place policies and procedures that are required when they are following the direction of the board and or the government when they have an appointee who has a direct conflict. So yes, now we're in a position of direct conflict where you have to have a disclosure, which we did have before, but it did not have a chair's name on it with a direct conflict. And then you have to make sure that you are following the procedures very closely.
But I'm not understanding whether you had a policy or not, which seemed to be the issue, saying you didn't have a policy on conflict, so it was okay to have conflicts. When the SDTC Act itself in Clause 16.2 states that no member should profit or gain any income from the foundation of the activities. Clearly, the Associate Deputy, the Deputy, and Minister Baines in making that appointment must have been aware of that. And if they weren't aware of that, they must have been aware of Section 4 of the Public Office Holder Act, which says that in the exercise of their duty that no public office holder shall further their private interests of those of their family and friends. They must have been aware of that, regardless of whether or not you had a corporate governance policy on it, that they were breaking those acts by doing this.
I was never asked about any of those things, and I do not know if they reviewed those before making the appointment.
I have about another 30 seconds.
Okay, so can you just explain to me again, and for everybody that's watching, what a managed conflict means? Because any board I've served on, and I've served on a number, You don't go on a board, first of all, if you have a conflict and you're doing business with that organization. That's just normal corporate and individual ethics. You don't do that. And secondly, if you are on a board and a conflict comes, you choose probably to leave that board if that conflict isn't more important to your business interest than being on the board. You make a choice. But in this case, it doesn't seem like managed conflict means that. It means you can have your cake and eat it too, it seems.
Well, I can't speak for the board members. I can tell you what the process is. They have to declare their conflicts. Conflicts are talked about at the beginning of every meeting. When a conflict has been declared, they are required, they do not receive the materials related to that conflict. They have to leave the meeting as part of the conflict of interest policy when anything related to their declared conflicts is discussed. And that's how it had to be managed once people had conflicts declared.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the ongoing work and the investigations from the Office of the Auditor General, the Ethics Commissioner, in addition to the law firm that's looking into the HR concerns. You also appeared before the Ethics Committee on November the 8th.
You had referenced that there are 140 companies that were pre-revenue, I think was the term you used. Was EnerStore pre-revenue when it was approved for the original round of funding?
The project was pre-revenue, yeah, by many years, yes.
And it was pre-revenue in 2020 and then in 2020?
Yes.
So it had been in operations for 4 or 5 years without any revenue?
It was built over 4 or 5 years. It was a very complicated compressed air energy storage project.
And how many employees, roughly?
About 4 or 5.
4 or 5 employees?
On the project.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the funding that you received was for the 4 or 5 employees? Do you receive a salary from EnerStore?
The money goes to the equipment and the labor.
Do you receive a salary for EnerStore?
Yes.
How much do you receive for EnerStore in compensation?
I'm not sure that is something I want to say. $120,000 the last couple of years.
Every year? Yeah. So out of the $200,000, $120,000 went into your compensation?
Certainly did not. It went into the project.
Which was funded by the organization that you're now the chair of? Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If I can explain
No, we don't need you to explain. Thank you very much. I will go on to you, Ms. Lawrence. I'm going to ask you a set of questions. Do you know somebody named Aldlyn Donnelly?
Yes, I do.
And what is your relationship with Aldlyn?
She's a person that I've known in the ecosystem for about 20 years.
Would you consider them a friend?
I would.
Were you aware of her role in Alice Ecosystem Project?
I was, and I declared it to the project review committee at the time that the Alice project came forward.
Did you recuse yourself in any conversations regarding the project?
I discussed it with the board, the project review committee. They determined that because the person was a subcontractor and because I have no voting role on the project review committee, that I could stay in the room for the conversation.
Did you involve yourself in the conversation?
Not that I recall.
You don't recall?
I don't usually, actually. The reason I say that is I don't usually engage.
So what would be the purpose of you being there if you're not going to engage?
I'm there to support my team as they present projects to the committee.
My question is, why did you request to be re-invited to this committee when there's so much ongoing work to get to the bottom of these issues raised by the whistleblowers at SDTC?
Well, first of all, I will say that I did speak to the Auditor General this week, and I am participating in all of those processes, even though I'm an individual and no longer employed by SDTC. I requested to come here because I thought it needed to be known that myself and SDTC's team did try to raise the concern that a chair appointed with a direct conflict would cause potential damage to both SDTC and to Ms. Verschuren.
You made Assistant Deputy Minister Andrew Noseworthy aware of the conflicts of interest and problems in appointing Ms. Annette Verschuren as chair of the board in advance of her appointment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Noseworthy was aware that by appointing her, ISED was violating their own contribution agreement with Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Is that correct?
I would have thought he would have known that, given that he is overseeing the organization and he knows what the Act and the contribution agreements say.
Can you confirm that you had your staff contact the minister's office to raise your concerns about this appointment?
Yes, we had several discussions at the staff level, and so there were bilateral discussions with the minister's office, and it was told to the minister's office that the previous chair had not had conflicts, and that in fact, in our knowledge, there had never been a chair with a company that was being funded by SDTC.
And what was the year that this appointment was happening, and who was the minister?
June 2019, and the minister was Minister Navdeep Bains.
So 2019, the Trudeau government went ahead with the appointment after you had raised concerns with the minister about the conflict.
That's correct.
So the Minister of Innovation, personally aware of serious problems with appointing Annette Verschaeren, but did it anyway. I'm asking for a third time because this is surprising.
Mr. Bains did not tell me directly. I did not communicate him with directly, but Ms. Verschaeren has said that she's talked to Mr. Bains 3 times before she agreed, and she said that he did know that she had the direct conflict.
Why do you believe that the Liberal government and the Minister for Innovation were so focused on appointing Ms. Verschaeren?
I don't have direct knowledge of what their concerns were, but I do know that they had concerns about his discussions publicly on other government legislation and policy that were ongoing.
Sorry, their concerns with whom?
With digital and data consultations that were ongoing at the time.
So I understand why. So I understand why you believe they wanted to replace the former chair. Why do you believe they were determined to replace the former chair with a chair that had been identified as being in conflict? Why was it so important to pick her?
I don't know. In fact, at the time that I was informed that they were going to replace the chair, I was asked by Minister Bains to speak to 2 candidates. I did speak to 2 candidates. The other one declined to put their name forward.
Did that candidate have a conflict of interest?
They did not, but they were concerned that they may invest in the sector in the future, and so that therefore they felt that they should not put their name forward.
Okay, I don't have a lot of time, but it's really important to understand. There was a conflict that the board chair that they'd put forward to appoint that she was in, because she had an interest in companies that had received money from SDTC. Is that correct?
Her company had a contract with SDTC at the time of her appointment.
Right. So a conflict before taking the position, and is now under investigation by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner for taking or directing funds from SDTC and voting for it for a company that she had an interest in. You're aware that that's the case as well?
I understand those investigations are ongoing, yes.
Do you know how often Annette Verschaeren was in contact with the minister at ISED?
With the most recent minister, I believe as far as I know, she only met with him twice, one at an announcement and once at a summit.
Did she deal with the deputy minister?
I believe they had ongoing dialogues, yes.
And who was the deputy minister that she would have been communicating with?
Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy.
How often would she have dealt with Mr. Kennedy?
I couldn't say.
More than 10 times?
I don't know. Whenever an issue would have come up that would have pertained to SDTC, so contribution agreements, encouragement of change in acts, those kinds of things.
And who acted as the liaison between SDTC and ISED?
At that level, she contacted the deputy minister directly. At my level, I dealt almost exclusively with Andy Noseworthy.
Did Veena
Bular, yeah.
Fill that role, or Amber Batul?
So Veena Bular was our government relations lead, and at some points Amber Batul would have had communications with the minister's office. It would have been at the policy chief level, yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Barrett, thank you, and thank you.
Merci.
Perkins for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I have this right so far, 2018, 2019, the former chair, Jim Basili, is speaking out publicly against the lack of movement of the government on its digital privacy policy. The government expresses concern to you as chair that he would be doing that and still be in this role. Shortly thereafter, the minister phones you and says, we're going to change the chair. Here's two names. You express reservations about one of them who had a clear conflict of interest. The government, Minister Baines, and the government, governor and council, the cabinet, appoints her to this job anyway, knowing they have a conflict of interest. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and the person that is the constant contact for you as CEO, back and forth to the ministry for you personally as a CEO, was ADM Noseworthy. Is that correct?
I believe from 2018 on, yes.
And so ADM Noseworthy said before this committee that he didn't recall any discussions of conflicts of interest around these. Do you believe that to be a true statement?
Well, what I know is that the materials were circulated to ADM Noseworthy and his team before every meeting. I know that conflict was discussed at every meeting, and in my recollection, Mr. Noseworthy was in those meetings.
So before this committee, Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy said that he was not aware of any of the conflicts until the whistleblower came to him in 2023. Do you think it's possible for the minister's office to appoint somebody when they've been notified of a conflict by the associate deputy minister, who presumably reports to the deputy minister talking to the minister, that the deputy minister could claim he didn't know about these conflicts? Does that make any sense to you?
I can't speak to Deputy Minister Kennedy because he was not the deputy at the time of Annette's appointment. That happened after.
So who was?
John Nubley.
And would you have expected him to have known about this?
I would have expected that public information and some research would have done before candidates were spoken with, yes.
You mentioned that your government relations lead was in contact with the minister's office about these conflicts. Who is that?
Vina Bular.
And was this all verbal, or did she also communicate it in writing?
I don't know if she communicated in writing. SDTC would have to bring forward any information if she did.
Mr. Chair, I would ask that the committee request any emails from this individual to the minister's office or to the deputy minister concerning these conflicts, if there are any.
Okay, thank you. Well noted.
This idea of managed conflicts, did it change the tone in the board of from what you experienced previously under Mr. Basili to how board members dealt with their conflicts in proposals that came forward, whether it was the COVID relief money or whether it was at least two, Andre Lise-Matteau, Stephen Kuchar, who subsequently had projects approved that SDTC funded that they had financial interests in. Was this a managed conflict that seemed okay because the board had set out that that was okay? Or did they say, oh, no, we don't think this is appropriate behavior, so we'll either make a choice between being on the board or having our financial interests benefit?
Well, I can give you an specific example where there was a board member pre-2019 where Mr. Lunn and I spoke to them about a potential conflict they had as a consultant with an organization. They stepped back from an organization and recused themselves. Later, after Mr. Lunn was gone and after Ms. Verschuren was appointed, about a year after she was appointed, that individual came back and said, well, given that direct conflicts are now allowed, I'm going to go on the board of this organization that was a funded company.
And who was that?
That was Guy Ouimet.
Okay. And he appeared before this committee, admitted he had a $4 million project that got funded while he was on the board. Did any member, did Ms. Verschuren approach any management to lobby them on behalf of money for the Verschuren Center?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. We have emails from your Chief Investment Officer, VP, that confirm he did and that he approved the fast tracking of that consideration. Those were given to us by the whistleblower. Would that surprise you?
Well, the fast track, this is a bit technical, excuse me, but the fast track would be that if
she had requested it, as in the email.
Well, I would have to look at the email,
Okay.
but a fast track is a thing that is
Okay, I don't need
different
the
than I
fast
think
track
you're thinking.
explanation, I don't need that. Is there any director who left the board after the cooling off period policy was passed that contacted the board to lobby on behalf of a company they were involved in or employed in for money from SDTC against the policy of the board?
There was an instance where a board member left the board, and Ms. Verschuren, I asked Ms. Verschuren to write him a letter saying that he could not apply from the perspective of the company that he currently worked for.
But that board member was calling and applying.
They were part of an application that they wanted to put forward, and we had to remind
What
him
was
that
his
the
name?
cooling off period had been passed. Jeff Cape.
So he actually went to be CEO of this company after leaving the board, and within the 1-year cooling off period was trying to get money from the board.
Yes, I believe he told the committee he thought it didn't apply to him because they had applied before, that he became CEO.
Thank you very much, and unfortunately, that's your time.